Kaylin here at Full Purpose and Heart, and I have a special guest for our video today. This is my husband, Mark, and today we are going to talk to you a little bit about the beginning of our homeschool journey. And when we first started, I was like, this is what we're gonna do. I think we're gonna homeschool, and he was a little less excited,
less enthused
about that idea. So we just wanted to address a couple of questions that he had and I had as we began our journey. And if you find yourself in that place, or if you have a spouse that is not as excited about it, then maybe we'll have some insight for you that can be helpful. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, then stay tuned. From the beginning. Okay, so I have here a list of about 5 questions that I want to for sure touch on, and then it might roll into some other conversation, but we'll try to keep it tight.
You've probably talked about this before, Kaylin, but what first drew you to wanting to do homeschool?
Okay, so this is a whole video in and of itself. We could talk about this for a long time, but a very short answer was that I felt like I had the choice to teach because I had been a teacher, and so because I had taught, I was interested in teaching, and so I knew it was an option. I feel like a lot of families out there just don't ever consider homeschooling as an option for their family because they themselves are like, I'm not a teacher, or I can't have my kids around me that often, or anything like that. So I think that's where it started for me, is that I knew that I could teach and I wanted to teach, so why not just teach my kids at home? So I think that that's where it started for me.
Yeah, and then there was some back and forth for quite a while on whether or not she wanted to do public school or homeschool. I mean, this wasn't like a, hey, let's go ahead and do this. It was more of, I mean, you labored over the decision for a lot of time.
It's true. Well, and I feel like a lot, sorry to cut you off, but I feel like a lot of people that I've listened to on YouTube have a reason for homeschooling is, the Lord's written it on my heart. The Lord called me to homeschooling. This is what the Lord has in plan for our family. And I never felt like I had that revelation. And I guess that there was a chunk of time when I was expecting that. I was waiting for this moment to be like, yes, Kaylin, homeschooling is for your family.
Yeah, she talked about that all the time. She's like, I'm just kind of waiting for God to tell me to do one thing or the other. And it never really came.
Although in an answer to prayer, I've never felt mad about it or upset about homeschooling. I've always just kind of felt like this feels right, so let's just kind of stay the course. So anyway, that's kind of where that went from there. So then I went to Mark and I said, what do you think about this?
Well, the reality is, I think fortunately for us is we already kind of live with the mentality of not necessarily being all mainstream, right? So when she first presented it to me, I did have your typical normal reaction, and I had my concerns, right? Like normally you would have when it kind of came out of left field when she first started talking to me about it. So as a good husband, I was just kind of like, oh, whatever you want to do, that's great. But of course your mind immediately goes back to you only really remember those kids that were homeschooled that were a little off, right? That's what I went to right away. Is I was just like, but honey, there's some really weird kids that were homeschooled. And the number one concern, as I've learned, is the number one concern with a lot of people is socialization. Like, okay, well, if we keep him home, then how's he going to get those social skills and that social interaction? And that was probably the first big hurdle for me, was trying to remember, or trying to kind of come to grips with that. But we go to church, and he has his own little group of kids his age, and he has play groups that he does, and sports, he does some sports stuff. So that socialization, I realized, doesn't have to come from school. In fact, my big aha was like, in school you don't really socialize in class. You're just sitting there, unless you have a teacher that's good and is doing like group work stuff and not really the only socialization.
But nobody likes group work because you get stuck with the kids that don't do the work.
Yeah, totally. And for me, I was just like, okay, well, the really only socialization happens during recess and lunchtime. But who did I always hang out with at recess and lunchtime was the same kids I was playing sports with or going to church with. So it wasn't anything different than the usual. And yeah, there was a few more people introduced into our circle at that point in time. But the socialization aspect of me, really kind of erased quickly. And I then tried to step outside of myself, and I was like, okay, well, yes, there were some weird kids that I knew, but I also had a really good friend that went to church with me, who was a really super duper good kid, really outgoing, really personable, who was homeschooled up until high school. And so I tried to fight that inner battle with, mentally, that we usually go to, which we lean towards stuff negatively first.
Right.
And then I remembered some of the positive kids,
well, and
stuff like that.
I feel like part of the answer that we came to was that we needed to make socialization a priority, or an aspect of our home. Is that, what are things we're going to socialize in? And you have to be cautious as a homeschooler not to over socialize, which I think is another kind of fault or trap that homeschoolers get into, is we don't want to have weird kids or kids that don't know how to socialize among their peers.
So you go too far
we go too far the other way, and now we're in every sport and every piano lesson and every music group. And so,
The reality is, though, is that he doesn't know anything different.
Right.
And so he's been fine. Yeah, he's been really good, and he still is really able to make friends quickly, which is cool.
And we do make an effort to make sure he is involved in, outside activities and we have church groups and stuff. So anyway, that's kind of how we've answered it, but really it was just a self-answer, because it's interesting. I remember I was on a plane a season ago, and the woman next to me, the topic came up of homeschooling, and she was an elderly lady, and she just said, well, do you have a hard time socializing? And it just made me chuckle, because I thought that really is
It's the number one.
The mainstream's concern is, how are you going to socialize your children? And I had an aha moment during that conversation, as I thought, I don't know how many teenagers today are properly socialized, because we have a big concern about how technology and screen time has created a group of kids that cannot talk to each other. They don't look at each other. They don't know how to have a conversation with an adult. They can't write a complete sentence, because everything is done through social media.
And it's an actual disorder. They've actually, in the psychology world, they've labeled it as digital dementia, which is crazy.
I didn't know that.
That's actually a thing now. But because of all of the social media and phones and stuff like that, and kids always have their nose in their phones, they are unable to socialize with each other anyways. And so there's actually a diagnosis out there. It's called digital dementia. So socialization is just different. It's just morphing, right? And even I remember going to school, there was always those kids they were just so introverted that they didn't talk to anybody anyway. So I really do feel that, kind of like with money just kind of reveals, the more money you get, it just reveals even more so the kind of person you really are. I think socialization is the same way. I think our son will be the same person he is with a small group of kids as he would be with a huge range of kids.
Right.
So anyways.
Right. Good.
Was that too much?
No. Did we cover that? Okay. Another thing so I wanted to touch briefly about how when you choose to homeschool, then mom gets to have her kids around her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we don't get mom breaks. She was really excited about that 24-hour time. But one of my biggest concerns was like, honey, a lot of times moms like to send their kids to school because they get some alone time. Well, and that's some of the comments that I got from my family when I said, I think that this is the path we're going to choose. My sister said, but when you send your kids off to school, you have all of this time that you can go to the gym, and your house stays clean for 8 hours, and you don't have the noise and the muck, and it's a very exhausting period of life that I'm in, because I'm constantly taking care of my kids. But just you wait till you can send your kids to school, and then you have all that free time. So what were your thoughts about that,
Mark? One thing to know about my wife, and I love this a lot about her, but it does make me a little nervous sometimes.
Watch out, I don't know what that means.
No, I know, right? Are you excited? Is when she goes for something, she goes all in. And so I knew that being around the kids 24/7 was eventually going to have some repercussions, and being that she just needed to get off and get alone. But she would never come out and say that to me, so I've tried to be extremely perceptive of that. So that was an extreme concern of mine, because I think everybody needs time away from that, just to recalibrate, refocus. I deal with children of a different nature at work. It's kind of a similar thing. It's almost kind of like parenting, but you just kind of need that time away to just recalibrate. And so I just let her know that, and she's fully aware that anytime she needs to go, she can just go, right?
Yeah.
But I think that one thing that is special about Kaylin is she doesn't see parenting as a burden, as she sees it as an opportunity. And I'm not just trying to score points here.
Sweet.
I'm not just trying to. I'm not trying to. Okay, a little bit, but it's true because she's very intentional with what she does, and I think you did a video about intentionality. I try to watch all of them, but she's very purposeful, and so the days don't seem chaotic for her. They seem very organized. This is when we do this. This is when we do that. I think that helps alleviate that stress of what am I going to fill the time with for 24 hours a day to more structured time.
Right.
And so I think that helps you.
It does help for sure. As kind of a word of advice, or what we could go from this, or what your takeaway could be, is a conversation needs to be had between each other, and you need to make sure that your spouse knows that this is a choice that we've made together, because despite his or her concerns, it is still a together choice, whether he gives or you give. But that it is going to be, I need to have some time, whether that's a specific day out of the month that you say that on this day I'm going to go to the library or to the coffee shop or whatever for a chunk of time, or every specific day of the week, or maybe like for our family, it's just whenever I need it, I send him a text in the middle of the day and I'm like, today's the day. Like, it's just not going to happen. And he knows, all right, I'm on dinner and I'm putting the kids to bed and Kaylin's going to be gone for the evening. And it really does help kind of reset it so that, and that doesn't necessarily make the next day perfect, but it definitely helps to be like, okay, like I've had some time, I went and I purchased some, impulsive purchases or whatever it was, so then it feels a little less busy, I guess, in that sense.
And I think kind of part B to that for having a long time is you need to have a serious conversation with yourself to say, am I up to this? Am I up to doing this every day? And she has her days where the structure kind of blows up and they kind of, she kind of wings it and figures it out as she goes.
Everybody does.
And I know pretty quickly when I get home, I'm like, okay, I need to get the kids and take care of bath time or whatever, just because it doesn't always go according to plan. But you need to make the decision for yourself, as a couple, yes, and individually, as the one staying home who's going to teach, that you can do that and you can handle it. And you absolutely can. If you have a framework and a structure, you totally can do it.
Right. But it is a choice and you have to own up to it,
Yeah.
if you're gonna.
And which you do, and that's great, because, I mean, it could very well go the other way where more often than not she's chaotic and waiting for me to get home so she can pawn the kids off. But
4 o'clock comes every single day.
It does.
And every single home. So y'all know what I'm talking about. All right. I don't know. What should be our next little
It's your call.
thought?
This
Okay.
is your show.
Another thought that I wanted to bring up. So one concern or a feeling that might come up that I want to make aware is that when you have a spouse that is not enthusiastic about homeschool, so together you say, okay, we're gonna try it for this year, let's say. This year we'll homeschool, and if it doesn't work out, then we'll go back and send them to second grade or whatever. And lots of families do that because they want to try out homeschooling. In fact, I would say even that we kind of started the road of like...
We had that mentality.
We'll just kind of do it for this year and see what happens.
In fact, I think the term is reevaluate.
Reevaluate every year.
We say that
and I think that there is merit to that and there is hope for that. But it also, I caution you in that conversation because that type of conversation has two outcomes. Number one, I think that it puts a lot of pressure on the teacher, the homeschooler, which for the most part are the moms, in that we don't want to fail in what we're doing. We don't want to fail our students. And if dad is constantly coming in saying, hey, so how did you do in school today? What are you learning? And we're just not feeling that we're being successful, then that can be an emotional strain on mom. It can be a relationship strain between you and your spouse. And the kids feel that. So putting a deadline on, well, we're just going to try it out, and then if it's successful, then maybe dad will be on board is it's a rough road, and so I would caution you to not do it. And, you know, I heard somebody was talking about it once, and his reaction was, he was kind of laughing because he said, so your game plan is that if you cannot educate your child at home, then you want to send them to the exact institution that could not educate you to educate your child. And I just was laughing about that because I was like, that is true. Like, I don't feel like I can sufficiently teach my first grader, so I'm going to send them to the place that taught me how to, to not teach.
And the other part of that, too, is it's kind of this unspoken pressure, I think, on her that's not fair when you say, well, let's try it for a year. Because anytime that she didn't feel like she had a good day, I never said it, but I think she would be like, okay, well, he clearly thinks we should put the kids in public school, right? Or something like that. Because this was a bad day, and because he knows it, he's just going to say, let's put the kids in school.
Right. Well, and there's going to be days as a mom that you're going to feel that.
Oh, yeah.
If you're constantly thinking like the backup plan is school, then, you know, I've heard it time and time again that moms are saying, gosh, I want to put my kids on that school bus because it is not happening, and it hasn't happened for the last 3 weeks. They are not understanding math, or they're not becoming a reader, so I must be doing something wrong. So anyway, I think that just puts a lot of pressure, and it is the road that we started with, and I think that it's only in the last year that we've kind of been like, okay, we're going to, instead of having one foot on either side, we're just going to commit and be more purposeful in our homeschooling journey, instead of just like, well, if it doesn't work out at the end of the year, then we'll throw them back in school.
And sorry, one of the other concerns, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, is, so the other thing that I had heard about was unschooling, right? And I know somebody that we know a few people that do unschooling, right. And I was really worried about that because, yes, kids do, and this might not, I mean, unschooling can be great for some families, but our concern was if he's naturally gravitating towards stuff and it's just becoming, I mean, it's super easy for him, we didn't want to say, okay, let's just focus on the stuff that he's interested in is easy for him and not challenge him on these other things. Right. And so that was part of this decision of, okay, we don't want to use school as a backup, because if the times become tough, then we're going to default to that instead of just saying, okay, well, let's figure out how we can help him get to where we want him to be. Right.
And I think that kind of to touch on or make it more of a, whatever I'm trying to say, I think there's a lot of different ways to homeschool your kids. Yeah. And when we first started out, I don't think, it's hard to really know how grand and how expansive homeschooling has become in our generation. And so we think back onto what we knew when we were kids, which is maybe one family in your 10 million people community that had homeschoolers, or what you know around you. And so we knew some people in our neighborhood who do a very relaxed homeschooling method, and that made me nervous because I'm not a relaxed person in my life. And I think that's kind of what made Mark nervous. So
and once again, it's just perception. It's all perception.
Right.
And when you dig in further and you learn more about it and you realize there are lots of good structured curriculum, and once again, you make the decision that you want to do this and you're all in, then yeah, it turns out to be great. But that pressure, I think that undue pressure that happened on her during our first year, and was just a lack of communication, because I was never like, look, Kaylin, I'm not thinking that we should just default to school. I mean, that was on me. But I think that she thought that. Anytime she felt like she had a bad day, I think she thought, oh, Mark's just going to want to put him in school.
Yeah. Well, it just makes you think like, well, clearly I'm not doing as good as the public schools could do, so there's got to be a better way. Yeah. So anyway, it was kind of rough. All right, I think we have one more question. So we saved this one till last. The last thing that Mark really had brought up, and I have heard it multiple times, is as Christians, we want our children to be the example or the light on the hill, like in the scripture in Matthew, where we are...
You don't want to hide it under a bushel.
Right. We are commanded or admonished that we need to share our light and share our good works. And those of you who know my son, he is just a really good boy. And we just love him because he is just such a sweet kid and a good boy. He makes friends really easily. He's kind to others, and
he sees needs and he goes to fill them.
My mama's heart is praising, obviously, but he is a really good kid.
He can do no wrong,
and so
basically.
He can do wrong. But on a good day, no. So this was a conversation that Mark and I had in the beginning. Was Mark was wanting to ensure that we provide that light to those people who could stand in need, and our son could be that friend to someone who didn't have any friends and that sort of thing. And so it was a concern, and it was a conversation we have, and maybe you have felt that way too, where you want your children to be the light because you feel like that's what they need to be. So from that, here's my answer. This is just my perspective, but...
Well, and can I dive in a little bit further to those concerns? Sorry. Done. I mean, I guess we just always been raised to believe that, that the gospel of Christ can help us become better people, and therefore we can help other people in turn. And so that thought process of, this was probably one of the hardest parts for me, was to think that, that we're not going to give Cameron those opportunities to reach out and lift up, the hand that needs to strengthen those feeble knees, to be that kind of person. And kind of like we mentioned earlier, I don't think that it matters. I think Cameron will always have that in. Do they know his name? Am I not supposed to say his name? I didn't know. I didn't know.
I say it occasionally. I'm pretty sure they know what his name is.
So I just didn't know if that was something we, I just think he's always going to be that person, because that's just who he is. He's always going to have that kind heart. And so when we were talking about this was the, kind of the comfort that Kaylin gave me.
So in 1 Corinthians, it teaches us that bad company produces or creates bad behavior. I've quoted it incorrectly, and so check the description box, and I'll make sure and put that link in there. But so from that scripture, and it was another person that I was talking to, we kind of decided together this aha moment where it was like, I really do believe that I can send my children out into the world to be the light, but I'm not going to do that until I, as their mother, feel like they are ready to do so. And I think that the Lord has put that in my responsibility. That's in my wheelhouse, to have the right to know when my son is spiritually ready and emotionally ready to be put in those types of situations. And public school attaches that to their age. But as everybody knows, we don't all develop at the same time. We certainly don't develop spiritually at the same time. Emotionally and physically is all on each person's own timeline. And so as their mother, I feel like I have the right and the ability and the power to be able to discern when my child is more able to go out, and then from there be able to go with. It reminds me of the phrase, and I've mentioned it once or twice here on my channel, but it's imitate, emulate, innovate. Mm-hmm. Imitate, emulate, innovate. And I really, really want to try and instill that idea, not necessarily in words, to my children, where first they will imitate what I am doing. And then I want them to be able to do what I'm doing and emulate it. So then I go with them to do some service, or I go with them to
Or they start doing it without even thinking about it.
Right. Yeah. Or they can go with other groups of youth that I know and trust, and parents and adults that I know and trust, and then they can have those different experiences and activities. And then from there, they can then go and emulate or innovate, where they can have a situation come upon them and they'll be able to think for themselves and act for themselves in a way that they know is right and good and worthy in the sight of the Lord. So that's my ultimate goal in moving forward. And I felt like public school attached all of that timeline to their age, where I was not ready to do that when my son turned 5 years old. You go to kindergarten and
to be honest, I think that looking back in hindsight, I think that putting him in public school at this point in time would probably hamper his ability to be more social, because he is a little hesitant to try new things. And I think just throwing him into that situation at such a young age, I think would have hindered him a little bit in his ability to be that light, because I think he would have kind of come into himself, or like stayed a little bit more introverted than we know he normally is. So I think that Kaylin's point is spot on, and I've had to work to come to that same realization that we as the parents, we're responsible for how he interacts and how he behaves and his spiritual maturity, his emotional maturity. So if we just go ahead and just throw him in the deep end and hope he can swim, that's probably not going to do a great job. And that's kind of along with that Corinthian scripture about bad company breeding bad company or whatever. Same goes opposite. So when we do feel that he's ready spiritually and emotionally to make those good decisions, he's going to attract those kinds of friends to him, the ones that are good, who want to, that have that same kind of maturity level that he has. So it took me a while, probably a good 4 or 5 months to be okay with that aspect of it, because I'm stubborn, and I just had a really hard time wrapping my brain around how you can let a light shine without letting it out into the world.
Right.
So
that you're not actually putting it under your bushel.
Yeah.
And it is a journey, and it's, I've had conversations with moms who have said, I have been doing this journey alone and my husband is not supportive. And to those women, I salute my hat, because for me, if I didn't have Mark's support, it really would be like, well, we are a team, and so we will face this as a team, and if you can't come on board, then we will go in a direction where we can both walk.
And due to my idiocy, I think for those first few months, she did feel like she was alone, because there would be times where she just felt so overwhelmed, and I'd be like, well, honey, you signed up for this. Like, this is what you want to do. Really smart.
It's true. You did say that.
Really smart. Luckily, she forgave me for being such an idiot. But I think that that it is important, whether or not they are fully on board. I think it's important that you help continue to communicate your why, your purpose, your reasoning behind it, and then I think that the results will fruit. Is that a word? Fruit later. They'll come. You'll see those results as they see that their kids are grasping onto. Your kids are grasping onto concepts and principles faster than they would in public school, because that's probably the last kicker for me as to why I got fully on board. Was in public school you can only be as good as the slowest student. And Cameron is a really smart, bright kid, and I was worried that if we put him in that environment that we really wouldn't be able to let him just go and run and do what he does really well, and to nurture that. So
it is hard as a public school teacher, having been in the public school sector, you kind of see a light in a different eye, because you're like, oh, well, I happen to know how classrooms have to run. And I've mentioned it multiple times on my channel that I still have that mentality in our school life, and how I wanted, like, well, he'll catch on eventually because we're going to move forward. But
at least we know the catch on eventually, what he's ever grasping naturally, which you can't do in a public school, wherever he's grasping naturally, you just continue to nourish that, and then what he's struggling with, you focus in on that stuff a little bit more and help him through it. So anyway.
So there you go.
Is this what you wanted?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think that it's been good, and hopefully you have found some good little nuggets of encouragement or help, or answered questions that maybe you can take and have conversations about, so that as you begin your journey or as you continue on your journey, then you'll be able to be successful and feel confident in what you've decided to do, and for however long that journey may take you. So.
And if you guys have additional questions, if you are a husband or a wife or a spouse or a partner to somebody who's wanting to homeschool, and you have concerns and questions, like, shoot them our way. We'll see if we can answer them for you. Yeah. For sure.
Put them in this description box below. Give us a thumbs up if you liked this video. I don't know why I called it a movie, but
because it was
a full-length feature film here.
It was filled with scripted comedy. That's why.
I don't know about that. Anyway, thanks so much, and we'll catch you in another video.